So we'll start by generating positive motivation for our time. So as normal, we try to cultivate a sense of confidence in the Buddhist teachings, and we generate an understanding of the Buddha and his teachings and those who deeply understand his teachings, like Lama Tsongkhapa and Lama Yeshe and Lama Zopa, as reliable, unmistaken guides. We generate the mind of bodhicitta wanting to engage in the study of the Lamrim for the purpose of following in the footsteps of the Buddha and becoming fully awakened ourselves, recognizing that with that capacity comes the ability to work perfectly for sentient beings. So we try to establish those minds of faith and refuge in bodhicitta. All right. So we'll start then with day 295. Is there anything from last class to address? The quotation on day 295: with bodhicitta, we become the source of happiness for all sentient beings. And then in the commentary, Lama Zopa is explaining that as someone who aspires to the Mahayana, even though we are someone who still needs to really master the small scope and the middle scope, we should hold to whatever degree we can, the aspiration, the wish to achieve enlightenment for the benefit of all sentient beings as our main practice. We and later on, Lama Zopa and Lama Yeshe will explain the methods, the actual meditative methods for gaining a direct realization of bodhicitta. And so, of course, that's something that we can work with, even as we are also, working on the small and the middle scopes. We can certainly cycle through these different realizations, really very much up to the individual to decide how to balance repetition with change. Certainly Lama Zopa encourages us to spend, if we can, at least a full month just on one topic, meaning that we come up with, as we've seen, there's so many different contemplations that are possible within these topics. Lama Zopa, Lama Yeshe are giving us 365 different contemplations. So they're helping us to do that, to map out how we would keep keep coming at these topics from different angles, so that we can have that depth, but also it isn't just that there's one or two ways of thinking about any of the topics, refuge or impermanence or karma, or any of the topics. They can be approached in a variety of ways. But we're not certainly not prohibited from engaging in the practices of the Great Scope, although the understanding is that a direct meditative realization is likely only once we've gotten through the small scope and really we've generated a real sense of renunciation, definite emergence from the contemplating the middle scope. But even lacking a direct meditative realization, there's familiarity still that can be gained prior to that, and that familiarity certainly can be transformative in terms of the priorities that a person has, what interests a person is pursuing, what a person is turning away from and turning toward. So we shouldn't feel like that it's locked away completely, because as Lama Zopa is saying, our heart practice in life is bodhicitta, is what he's saying. So we can take every opportunity to, even when we're meditating on the small scope, on the middle scope, or engaging in activities, to do it with the motivation that that particular piece of the puzzle is meant to lead us to enlightenment. It isn't that piece of the puzzle, whether it's karma or guru devotion or whatever it might be. It's not isolated. It's not serving a small or lesser purpose. Its purpose is to be one chain in the or one link in the chain, that is a continuous path of practice that culminates in enlightenment. So this familiarity is something that every single day we can deepen, and that's what Lama Zopa is suggesting that we do, that we take it as yes, I'm meditating on karma, etc., whatever it might be, but and even if we aspire to the Vajrayana, as we've said, without bodhicitta, the Vajrayana is ultimately not going to have the same power that it would otherwise have. So the real purpose of the Lamrim is to create a suitable vessel, is to create a practitioner who can really utilize the Vajrayana path, and without focusing on that, even if you just look in the foundation of all good qualities, Lama Tsongkhapa very clearly says, by practicing in the common path, may I become a suitable vessel for practicing the Vajrayana. And that includes all of these realizations up to emptiness and bodhicitta on the great scope, because ultimately still we have to combine, whether it's in this life or not, at some point we do have to practice the Vajrayana, that there is no path to enlightenment without that. Even the bodhisattva path eventually kind of will lead a person to take up the Vajrayana. But so the whole point is to prepare the mind by training in the common path. But of course, as I said, the Vajrayana isn't separate from bodhicitta, and it isn't, you don't get there and you learn that, something that was said previously isn't true, or that it's not really like that. It's just a method of working with the subtle energy system of the body so that your meditations are incredibly deep and incredibly powerful, because you're harnessing the mind of clear light rather than a coarser mind. But still, bodhicitta, the correct view, those are still the essence of what a practitioner is doing. Yeah. So, he brings this back to self-cherishing, and how that's the main everything in Buddhism. All of the Buddhist teachings are they're tamping down self-cherishing, self-grasping, and ultimately leading toward completely eliminating self-grasping and self-cherishing. Um, he says, when we consider it in this way, we can see that our good heart, cherishing others rather than cherishing oneself, is the most precious, like a wish-granting jewel, bringing happiness to every single hell being, every single hungry ghost, every single animal, human, demigod, god, and intermediate state being. What we achieve is unimaginable and priceless. So in a way, as a person progresses through the bodhisattva grounds and paths in dependence upon this meditative realization of bodhicitta, then as they progress and get closer and closer to enlightenment, they begin to take on some of the capacities, um, like being able to emanate, to have multiple emanations. That isn't something that only occurs for the first time as a fully enlightened being. Um, as a person gets closer and closer, their ability to emanate um, increases, and then of course it's perfected in the state of enlightenment. Um, but it is very much the case that high level bodhisattvas can appear in multiple realms, and so this, it's a literally true statement that that through bodhicitta, a person is able to appear in these different realms and directly work for the benefit of all of the sentient beings of the different realms. Um, right. Any thoughts or questions so far? So if we go on to day 296, Lama Yeshe is now going to give us one of the methods that I mentioned. The first of which is equanimity. We have mentioned in previous classes that the immediate cause, or the most proximate prior cause of bodhicitta, is also a meditative realization of equanimity. So the quotation is, to discover universal love within our mind, we have to develop a feeling of equilibrium with all living beings in the universe. So he says, just as level ground is the basis on which we build a house, so too is equanimity and unbiased attitude toward other beings, all other beings, the foundation for cultivating bodhicitta. So our state, what we are deeply familiar with, what we've been deeply habituated to as ordinary sentient beings who've not yet entered the bodhisattva path, is to put people into different categories based, really just on, is this person acting in a way that seems like it's supporting my goals, my interests, my desires? And if so, and really only for as long as they continue to do that, we regard them as a friend. We regard them as a, someone that we feel warmly toward, close to. And, for those people, we have a high tolerance for, bad days that they have, or times when they might be short with us, or, what have you. And if they need something, we have a high uh, degree or high interest in helping them out as best we can, because we expect that, they would also do the same if we needed help, or if we were going through a difficult time. Uh, so, and then if a person uh, is not working in a supportive way, but they're also not working against our interests, then we would say, well, that person's a stranger. That person is just, they live down the hall. I see them sometimes. They seem fine, but, they've never done anything specific for me. They're not impolite, but they're also, they're not going out of their way to say or do anything particularly useful. So they're just kind of a person who exists. And we don't think much about the fact that they have the same struggles as the people that we care about, that, that they are sometimes devastated by things that are happening in their lives. They have aspirations and fears, just as we do, and just as, the people that we care about. So we have a more difficult time seeing them in their completeness, seeing them as a whole person, because they're just sort of in the background. And if they approached us with some big task, we'd probably not be overly inclined. It would kind of depend, um, you know, and even, we can kind of think about that. I think, well, this person does live in my building, or they do live next door. So maybe that's an opportunity to curry like some good favor. But um, if it was just someone that we were passing in a different town on the sidewalk, you can just think about like those two scenarios. I'm thinking about them, and I know that it's true, for me. The people that we, that we might see again, that maybe they could do something, for us. um, we're a bit more likely than if we're just traveling through in a different state, and someone's like, hey, my car got stolen. Would you mind, spending the next 5 or 6 hours with me as I try to navigate, like, going to the police station and then going, here, and can you take me there? And we'd be like, well, no, I'm really sorry. Like, I can call you an Uber, and we would move on. But if our best friend, said the same thing, we would probably be quite likely, to be helpful. And 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 then we've got people that are acting against our interests. And in the historical literature, they call those enemies. Um, but we can call them just people we don't get along with, people that we find difficult, people that don't seem like they're interested in acting in ways that make our lives easier. Um, and of all of the kinds of people, we're particularly unlikely to be interested in helping when those people are in trouble. Um, and there's always exceptions, and it depends on different factors. Um, but in general, everyone that we come across, we put into these different categories, a friend, enemy, and stranger. And that's a real obstacle to this, because again, bodhicitta is the wish to achieve enlightenment for every sentient being without any exception, without any regard for what that sentient being is doing with their life. It doesn't matter what kind of what realm they're in. Doesn't matter what kind of behavior they have, what kind of actions they're engaging in. We want to work for their enlightenment, irrespective of any of those details, simply based on our recognition that they are a suffering sentient being and that they would benefit from being able to achieve enlightenment, and that they are no less deserving of that benefit than any other sentient being. So we can't get there without having this equal regard in our mind, which is still a great scope contemplation. It's still because the real function of the middle scope of renunciation is to get rid of kind of a different tendency. We've just covered the a couple of days ago we finished covering the middle scope, and until we have that really down in our mind and have really stable realizations of that, we're going to try to make cyclic existence work. We're going to think that there's some combination of internal and external realities that are good enough, and that that works sufficiently well. And that is the main obstacle that we are overcoming on the middle scope. And until we do that, we can't really say, of course, we can kind of intellectually bring to mind what we're told are the benefits of enlightenment and so on, and we can gain more and more familiarity, but still there's this incredibly strong impulse to be focused on trying to make things work out within cyclic existence, and not really having this very deep, very strong, unshakable interest in actually no longer participating within cyclic existence. But here, the obstacle is this categorization that we, once we've done that, still we have a tendency, a very deep-seated tendency, to not have equal regard. And then if there isn't equal regard in the mind, the idea that we validly can say that we're working for the benefit of all sentient beings is just not really accurate. So that's the obstacle that Lama Yeshe is discussing here. This grasping desire and attachment that we have to those who we feel like are beneficial, the sort of indifference that we have to those who are neither helping nor harming, and then the real animosity that we have, the aversion, the animosity that arises naturally and strongly in the mind if someone seems like they're working against our interests or the interests of people that we care about. Any thoughts or questions? So then Lama Yeshe isn't going to just tell us to do that. He's going to explain how you do that. What is the meditative vehicle or process that we have available to us that actually will generate this equanimity in the mind? And um, so he makes it clear that it is something that we generate in meditation. And so I'll just basically, and you know, a lot of people have done this meditation. We've done it a number of times in different contexts in classes that the center offers. It's called the friend, enemy, and stranger meditation in sometimes, or it's called the equanimity meditation. So the process is to visualize, as it says here, visualize in front of you a person that you don't like. Um, so this is one. There's different ways of actually doing the visualization. In many meditations that aren't the equanimity meditation, they will use this description, and then it's also true that in equanimity meditations sometimes you'll just visualize the three people in front, like sort of in a semicircle, like facing you. But it's quite common if you're doing um, many meditations where you are maybe visualizing the Buddha, or you're visualizing Chenrezig or what have you. Those visualizations will include all sentient beings, and um, as best you can, visualizing a huge mass of sentient beings. And in those meditations, this is the way that you often will do that, which is that those that are in front of you. So, for example, in those meditations, the Buddha would be on, a throne, on a lotus, at some point in the distance, maybe 15 feet in front. And then between you and the Buddha, you visualize people that agitate you, people that you don't like. Could be people that you know personally, could be people who have positions of power that you feel like are causing harm, and that you hear about, and there's agitation, there's disturbing attitude in your mind. So in all of those sorts of meditations, they're kind of in between you and the Buddha, which in a way is symbolic of the the fact that your animosity toward them is literally separating you from enlightenment. Like you have to overcome animosity toward this group of people in order to be, joined with the state of enlightenment that's represented by the Buddha or Chenrezig or what have you. So it's kind of, this obstacle is sort of put in front of you, and it's kind of like showing you this is a real problem. The way that you feel toward these sentient beings is a real challenge for your spiritual growth and development. And then behind you, generally, are your loved ones, and that is kind of, in a way, symbolic of the fact that that is your support system in this life. Like those are the people that they literally have your back. Like they're literally, the ones that are there behind you, pushing you forward, supporting you, helping you. So in a way, it's kind of representing the role that they are playing, in your life. And then all around, in all directions, are the strangers. So in a way, also putting them on the periphery is also symbolic of what we normally do with strangers, which is to put them in the background, to not, they're not, the enemies in front and the dear ones in back, those are the ones that we're really strongly in relation to, either positively or negatively. But then strangers are people that, they're just kind of background noise in our lives. And that's kind of symbolic of why we, because we do put them on the periphery, and that's also, a problem. So typically, that is the, as I said, that's the visualization that Lama Yeshe is using for the equanimity, this particular equanimity meditation. As I say, sometimes you might just pick 3 individual people, one representing the group of difficult people, one representing the group of strangers, and one representing the group of loved ones or friends, and visualize them seated, facing you, in sort of in front, to the right, to the left. That's also a perfectly valid way of doing it, but this is Lama Yeshe's presentation in this contemplation. So then, again, many of us have done this meditation. You turn toward, in your mind, in turn, each of these groups that are represented, and you try to think about, you analyze. This is an analytical meditation, so you think about why, so it's as if in your mind you are observing that this person is literally in front of you, and then you just think, when that person is literally in front of me, what arises in my mind, um, and then you should notice, when you do that, that when you are directed at the friend, there's a sense of closeness, there's a sense of warmth, there's an interest and a willingness to benefit. That is what is arising in the mind. And then when you look at the stranger, there's a kind of cooling of the mind, a disinterest in the mind, and that's what's principally, arising, kind of like you're just looking at, anything. It isn't, you don't even really know anything about the person that you're looking at. And so it's sort of indifference and ignorance that's arising. And then when you look at the agitating person, then you have this sense of aversion, this wish to pull away, perhaps anger, perhaps ill will, depending, on the specifics of that relationship. And then you try to think of, like, why is it? Why do I feel differently? What has, you know, at some point, that dear friend, was a total stranger to me. How did they get into my good graces? How did they, why do I now feel differently about them? And then you think, well, this person that agitates me, what are the reasons? What is it that they have said or done or not done, that is causing me to feel this way? And then, you direct your mind to the stranger and you think, why am I disinterested? Why do I feel so disconnected and uninterested in what's happening in this person's life, what they're going through, what their needs are, what their desires are? And you literally think of all of those reasons. And then you ask yourself, how reasonable is that? How logical is that? How much sense does that make? Is it valid? Is it reasonable that because someone has the same interests that I do, because a person agrees with a lot of the views that I hold, because a person shows a certain level of interest and kindness toward me, then I should be someone who will work for their benefit. And if they don't do that, then I will withhold working for their benefit. Um, is that logical? Is that reasonable? Does that make sense? Is it in tune with deeper truths about how, how that sentient being exists, and my relation, to them? Um, so you learn to see through those distinctions, the basis of those distinctions. You learn to see them as silly and as not supported by logic or reasoning, that it's just our own egoistic preference that is at play, and that there's no deeper um, truth or logic or reasoning behind it. Also, when we think about how people change from one category to the other category to the other category, which we've all had experiences with in this life, people can move from all, in between all three of these categories, and sometimes more than once. They change, they go from one to the other, then they can go, even in reverse again. And and that's kind of neurotic, when you really think about it. That's kind of um it's kind of a problem. It's our own dissatisfied, um, afflicted perspective that is generating these categories, and they have no valid basis in what's true, what makes sense, what's reasonable. So the more you engage in that contemplation, the more insight that you're able to generate, that is able to argue against those categories, and to argue against the primacy of the role that process of categorization is playing in our lives. And to think, the logical thing, the reasonable thing, is to understand that irrespective of whether a sentient being is benefiting me or working in a way that seems like it's against my interests, or whether we don't know what they're likely to do, whether it's to benefit or to oppose our interests, all of those sentient beings are exactly the same, in that they deeply wish to be happy. They deeply wish to be free of even the slightest negativity, just like oneself. And none of them have any greater, more valid claim to accomplishing that. Their claim to happiness and to freedom from suffering is identical among all of those kinds of people, particularly as, again, when we recognize that the same exact person we can relate to in these different categories. So nothing has changed about that person except whether or not they've started or stopped working for our own individual specific benefit. And putting any importance on that in a wider context, we can see how utterly ridiculous it is, when we think about it. Again, of course, you have to engage in this contemplation over the course of years, to generate these deep insights, and to have them not just be intellectual, but to have them really touch, how we naturally, spontaneously relate to others. But that is as Lama Zopa, Lama Yeshe are saying, we have to get to that point, in order for it to be realistic for us to say that I really will achieve enlightenment for the benefit of all sentient beings. Any thoughts or questions?
It's really superficial that we do that over and over and over again. I just, yeah, putting that in your face and, being able uh, to see it's very superficial that we do that. It's very interesting.
Yeah, I mean, it's just, we have familiarity from beginningless past lives that, that we make our own desire, the central focus of everything that we think and we say and we do. So it's like, well, if you're not with me, then you're against me. And, then, and, I'm sure part of it, there's probably programming to some degree, even biologically, in terms of, because the mind has to work through the media of the brain. And so, that's unavoidably true. And certainly, we evolved in small, enclaves of, kind of closer knit groups. And so we depended on our survival with our relationship with those groups, and then the other groups, that we were fighting against for resources and so on. So, that kind of, in a way, we probably, in a certain time and place, that tendency probably kept us alive. And it's just not beneficial in terms of enlightenment. But in a conflict ridden, resource scarce kind of environment, those tendencies can get sort of hardwired into the way that our brain works, and the mind is dependent upon that, as a human. So we're kind of overcoming some pretty deep familiarities and programming, um, because it isn't something that serves us, if we've taken enlightenment as our goal. That kind of mind is something that, is prevented, is blocked by that kind of discriminating mind.
Even something closer in time, using your street smarts. It's not the same as, battling a saber-toothed tiger, but yeah, using your street smarts to judge people on the streets. Yeah, it's something we use every day.
Next contemplation, day 298, says basically Lama Yeshe in day 298 is saying that, with this, that the Buddha, in encouraging us to think in this way, he's not trying to get us to not see, some, that to ignore some differences that exist, and also not to even relate in some ways differently to different people. If someone, in terms of our behavior, in terms of our decisions, our choices, if someone is a threat to our lives, then we don't, in that situation, we have to be reasonable, and we have to withdraw. We have to, we don't go up to that person and, think, how's your day going? I hope, and we just, if, we use our wisdom, maybe, and for example, also on the subway, you're not going to hug, the person next to you and start, telling them that you love them and that, you're so grateful, that because they would think that you're crazy. Um, so it isn't about changing, how we relate to people through, in all cases, we still relate to people in appropriate ways, but we change the mind. We change, what's happening in the mind, even though outwardly there are differences between, your child, your husband or wife, your a person on the subway, and we need to use different words and different behaviors and different language, and because outwardly there are some differences, but what we're trying to overcome is the actual dislike that we have and unwillingness that we have to be of benefit to those that we think are harming us. So we might withdraw from someone who's harming us, but in the mind, we would still want to maintain the wish to be of benefit to that, even though in that moment, in that situation, we may not be able to work, outwardly for their benefit, but we hold in our mind the wish to be able to do that. And in the same way, we might feel warmly toward someone, who is a stranger due to our training, but we can express that through having, looking for an appropriate opportunity to do, to help them with their bags, or, but we don't say things that are inappropriate for that moment, for that, but still we look for things that we to express that are culturally and societally appropriate. So, it's not about treating all sentient beings in the same way, outwardly, but it is about changing what is, what we're doing with our mind. He says it's completely logical that we should feel equal with all living beings. We should approach the feeling of equality with analytical knowledge wisdom. Again, this is Lama Yeshe. So these phrases that he has, analytical knowledge wisdom. When we reach that point intellectually, we let our mind abide in the feeling of equality for as long as we can, maintaining single-pointed concentration on equilibrium as long as possible. When we get distracted, we return to our logical reasoning and again explain to ourselves the nature and shortcomings of attachment, When we come to the conclusion that we're equal with others, again, let our mind rest in that feeling of equilibrium. We should be satisfied with that and then just stay there. So he's describing here sort of the process of analytical meditation generally, where it's always this kind of visceral experience of the topic that goes deeper than just a mere intellectual view of the topic. It is a felt experience or insight that we generate, regardless of what the topic is, whether it's death and impermanence or karma or equanimity. In all of those cases, we engage in this process of analysis, of reasoning, and that is meant to generate an insight, a conclusion, a result that flows from that analysis. And when that arises, when that dawns in the mind, we hold the mind on that insight, that felt visceral sense of that this is true, that this is the way things are, that this is a valid way of understanding that topic. And over months and years, the insight deepens, and that feeling might shift or become stronger, or and our concentration improves, and so we might have a deeper absorption into that insight. So he's just really describing how all analytical meditations function. They all function in the same way, where we can generate the understanding that this is dumb. What I'm doing is irrational, and what I could start doing is rational, does make sense. That's the insight. And then through repetition, that insight affects the mind in deeper and deeper ways, and it begins to bleed over into daily life. The formal practice that we're engaging in transforms what we start doing when we're out and about in the world. We will find it naturally easier to to think about how people that we don't know are these complete people with real lives. They're not just background characters, and that they matter just as much as our closest friend, our dearest loved one. And how even if a person isn't working for our benefit, they are still worthy of love and respect and compassion, and our our effort on their behalf. And then that actually impacts how we are relating, with repetition, with time, with effort.
This is where I struggle. Obviously, with me flipping off other drivers, this is where I struggle. I can love everybody around me. I can think good thoughts about everybody as I walk down the street. But the second I step off the sidewalk and almost get hit by a car, my mind instantly goes, idiot. And yeah, that's where any ideas? Your dog got hit by a car.
Yeah, no, I sympathize. The last week or so, I think everyone's trying to hit me with their car. I don't know what's going on. I can't go anywhere. It's scary out there. So Yeah, I mean, I think the best thing in general, I would say, um, because, and of course, that is that particular example, of course, we feel actually threatened, in a way that's pretty powerful. Like, it's different than, we feel like their carelessness was actually a real threat. And that's probably more difficult. Um, so I think, like with all of the afflictions, all of the um, ways of reacting that are not what we would hope, we we can't ever start with not doing that in the moment that it arises. That's the last thing that happens. That's the most, we want to get to that point where, even as it's happening, we have a response that's so deeply ingrained in the mind that that is the response that's called up in that moment. Um, but to get to that, the best way generally is to bring to mind a better response as quickly as is possible. Um, so that could be, you know, a few minutes later, so of course, the initial not so great response happened. Um, but at some point, shortly thereafter, um, even if it's that night, or later when things are calm and you're at home, and you can think back, even if it's then, to think about, well, what would it like, I didn't make anything better, like in that moment. um if you think about it, like the way it, as we know, the afflictions are painful when they arise. They agitate and they disturb our own mind, right? So that thought, the way that we responded with anger in that moment, it wasn't fun. It feels kind of powerful. It feels, anger, that it has an energy to it, and it makes us, because in a way we felt vulnerable, right? We felt threatened. We felt almost powerless because they had the car and they almost hit our very fragile body, right? And that is scary. And so our impulse is to kind of reclaim that sense of powerlessness with this energy of anger, which feels very energetic, like we stood up for ourselves, like we didn't allow that to happen. We did something. But what we did, I mean, it didn't actually make that situation go better. And it never would. It isn't possible, that responding in that way actually positively impacts that process, what's happening. Um, but we could imagine, again, later at some point, we could imagine what would have happened had I thought differently in that moment. If I had thought, well, maybe, maybe they're not thoughtless. Maybe they have somewhere, maybe they were speeding because, they really, they're trying to get to someone who's in the hospital that they need to go and see before that person dies. um, or they just got a phone call saying, that someone is really sick and they're going to, we've been in those situations ourselves. We've rushed, we've been kind of thoughtless and careless, and when we when we were told, oh, there's a flood, in your, did you know that, that there's water coming up? And so like we rush, to go fix something or solve something or help someone. And when we're doing that, we're not thinking about, we're not capable of like following all of the traffic laws, and hopefully nothing bad ever happened, too. But we've also been in those situations where we were preoccupied about something that was happening that we felt strongly about wanting to go fix, and we've driven in, not the best, or we were just really preoccupied. We were careless, but carelessness isn't like reserved for terrible people. It's common. It's, we've also been just, we got bad news, or we were worried about something, we were spiraling about something, and so we didn't um, we didn't fully pay attention. And there have been times when we had to break because we just didn't see the person. So if, and those are all like, they're not made up things, like we're not lying to ourselves. Those are all, we've been in those situations, and those people very likely could be in one of those situations. And if we can recollect that in the moment, and then just think, oh, I hope they get where they're going safely, or oh, I hope that, that whatever, whatever is going on that's causing them to not be operating their car in a safe manner, I hope that that gets resolved and that everything is fine. Um, and we can see in our own mind that that's a more peaceful thought. That if we can see, I wish to be like someone who could always naturally, spontaneously think that way, rather than, how dare you, rather than, I hope you crash, I hope that something bad happens to you so that you learn not to do what you're doing. That is a painful thought that agitates the mind. Um, so the basically, and again, unfortunately, none of the antidotes in Buddhism, work within a few weeks or a few months, but they work eventually. Um, so I think in general, the idea is to replay actions, and then of course, maybe also purification practice, is also a vehicle that we have, um, but to also replay that either in formal meditation or just kind of in a quiet moment, um, and come up with something that seems like a, a more beneficial, peaceful, calm way of relating to that event, and imagining that you did do it like that when it happened. And then at some point, it starts, just due to the force of habit, because all of these analytical meditations, they function on the force of habit. They function on the level of familiarity. We're deeply familiar with things that are not great right now, and we can become deeply familiar with things that are great, in the future. And that's all that analytical meditation is replacing existing habits and familiarities with new habits and familiarities. Um, so I do think that, eventually, through practice and through effort, um, we can shift those responses. But as I say, that is sort of primal. It's a pretty primal, when that threat to self is there. It's more difficult. So we also have to be patient, with ourselves, and just kind of think, well, how quickly how quickly did I recover, and just kind of rejoice, like, well, maybe a year ago, I would have thought that that is the right thing to do. And I would have, later in the day, I would have had more angry thoughts toward that person. And I would have elaborated on my angry thoughts toward that person. And now I don't do that. So that's wonderful. Like, that's progress. So, also seeing, like, because again, like, actual spontaneous response is the best case scenario, and that's reserved for, like, not now, but we can see the progress that's leading us up to that ability. That's all I got.
Thank you. No, thank you. I'll try and redirect my mind.
Okay, so we're out of time for today. So today's Thursday. So we'll pick it back up on Monday. So we'll end with dedication. So bring to mind the altruistic motivation that you've established. I think that by having listened and participated, you've actualized that motivation, which has generated positive energy in the mind. That positive energy will ripen in the future in beneficial, supportive ways. So think of all of the spiritually meaningful, beneficial, and supportive ways that you're offering that positive energy and wishing it to ripen. All right. So yeah, we'll pick it back up on Monday. Have a good weekend.